In the thick darkness of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where time seemed to have stopped, the faint light of the moon barely pierced through the clouds. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of rotting wood and something else. Something incomprehensible. Here, among abandoned buildings and overgrown roads, secrets lurked that no one dared to uncover. A group of researchers who had come to study the aftermath of the disaster set up camp near an old kindergarten. They knew the zone was dangerous, but none of them could have imagined what they would face. The first few days passed quietly. They collected samples, photographed the ruins, and recorded radiation levels. But one evening, everything changed. When the sun set, one of the researchers, Andrei, heard a strange rustling in the bushes. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the tent to inspect the area. The air was still, but he felt like someone was watching him. Suddenly, his flashlight caught something large moving among the trees. It was a shadow, but not an ordinary one. It pulsed as if alive. Andrei screamed, and his cry shattered the silence of the night. The rest of the team rushed out of the tents, but found nothing. Andrei was gone too. They called for him, searched for traces, but he had simply vanished. The next night was even worse. From the forest came sounds resembling whispers, but the words were incomprehensible, as if the language didn't belong to humans. The air grew electric, and everyone felt that something was wrong. One of the researchers, Olena, a biologist, was drawn to a strange firefly flickering in the darkness. She followed it, ignoring her colleagues' warnings. The firefly led her to an old house with broken windows and a door that creaked in the wind. Inside, she saw something that made her scream. On the walls were symbols emitting a faint light, and in the center of the room stood a figure resembling a human, but its face was distorted, as if melting. Olena stepped back, but the figure lunged at her with incredible speed. The rest of the team found her the next morning. She was sitting in a corner of the room, her eyes wide open, and black liquid flowing from her mouth. She muttered something incomprehensible, and when they touched her, she screamed, "They're here! They've always been here!" The team decided to leave the zone immediately, but the road back was blocked. The trees seemed to have shifted, forming an impassable wall. Night was falling, and they realized they were surrounded by the same shadows Andrei had seen. The shadows moved closer, and each of them felt their minds beginning to succumb to panic. The last one left was the group's leader, Ihor. He recorded his final words on a tape recorder. "It's not radiation. It's something else, something that feeds on our fear. It was here long before the disaster. It was waiting." A few months after the disappearance of the research group, a new team arrived in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. This time, it was a military unit tasked with investigating strange signals coming from the area. The signals were weak but repeated at regular intervals, as if someone was trying to make contact. They had no idea what awaited them. A group of 4 soldiers, led by Captain Marchenko, entered the zone at dawn. They were well equipped, body armor, weapons, night vision devices. But nothing could prepare them for what they would find. The first few hours passed quietly, but as they approached the source of the signals, the air grew thick and heavy. Even the birds stopped singing. They emerged into a clearing where an old Soviet bunker stood. The door was half open, as if someone had recently used it. Captain Marchenko ordered 2 soldiers to stay outside while he and Sergeant Koval entered. The air inside the bunker was cold, and frost covered the walls. On the floor were footprints, not quite human, as if something heavy had been dragged. At the end of the corridor, they found a room. On the walls were the same symbols described by the missing researchers. But now they glowed brighter, as if alive. In the center of the room stood a table, and on it lay a tape recorder. The captain turned it on. The voice of Ihor, the leader of the missing group, was weak but clear. "It knows about us. It reads our thoughts. Don't look it in the eyes. Don't listen to its voice. It doesn't want us to leave." Suddenly, the recorder froze, and another voice emerged, low, hoarse, as if from another world. It spoke in an unknown language, but every word sent shivers down their spines. Sergeant Koval stepped back, but the captain stood frozen, as if entranced. His eyes turned glassy, and blood began to flow from his nose. Koval ran out of the bunker, but what he saw outside was even more terrifying. The 2 soldiers who had stayed behind stood motionless. Their eyes were wide open, their faces twisted in horror. Around them circled the same shadows the researchers had seen. They seemed to dance, but every movement was awkward, unnatural. Koval tried to flee, but the road back was blocked again. The trees had closed in, forming a labyrinth. He ran, not knowing where he was going, but every step felt heavy, as if the air had turned into thick syrup. Suddenly, he heard the captain's voice calling him. He turned and saw Marchenko, but something was wrong. His face was distorted, his eyes glowed red, and his mouth stretched into an impossible grin. "You can't escape, Koval," whispered the captain, but it wasn't his voice. It was the voice of whatever lurked in the shadows. Koval woke up in a hospital a week later. He had been found near the edge of the zone unconscious. He didn't remember how he had escaped, but in his pocket they found a tape recorder. The recordings had been erased, but when they were restored, they heard something horrifying. Voices chanting in an unknown language and screams. So many screams. The Chernobyl exclusion zone remains closed. The military no longer tries to investigate it. But sometimes, in the dead of night, you can hear a faint signal coming from there. And if you listen closely, it sounds like someone is calling for help or waiting for new victims.